infrastructure and what's actually happening here. And I think what we're seeing for the first time is a real shift back to where we were in 2001, where there was an internet revolution. And I think one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the fact that there is a new paradigm in the internet that's arrived, and it actually will have a profound impact in India, and we believe that there will be quite a bit of growth coming out of a series of underlying drivers that we'll talk about today. This is just to talk about today. If you look at the internet, it is largely focused on Silicon Valley. If you look at most of the tech companies today, sit in a corridor of about 150 miles from San Francisco south. And if you look at it right now, this is actually 8% of the world's stock market capitalization sits in that 120-mile corridor, okay? If you look at that, though, of the applications and software that they build, 71% of it is actually done here in India. So if you look at it, most of the Fortune 500 market capitalization, a large portion of it is here. Most of the work is actually done here. The reality is, similar to what happened in the internet age and in the software age, we believe that there will be a shift. There's no reason for all these companies to sit in that 120-mile corridor. We believe there will be a corridor here in India as well. And so our bet over the next 5 to 10 years is that India will become the next Silicon Valley. There'll be an area in India that actually will become the next Silicon Valley. And because of that, this country will actually require many of the capabilities that you have today in the United States, in the data center area, but also access to fiber. Next. If you look at 2000, the three major components that enabled the internet to come to fruition was the access to computing, the access to fiber or connectivity to end users, and this is actually what enabled the original start of the internet. If you look at what's going on today, we have another shift, which is using those three components again. This will also be the next generation, we believe, of the internet. We'll announce today our Eagle system, which actually will start in Italy. It will come all the way down. It will actually land in Mumbai. It will actually have a stub to Chennai, and then it will actually go all the way to Hong Kong. This system, like our previous systems, will be funded from our partners. So just as backgrounds, in our history of GCX, we've actually never financed a cable system. We actually do this through our partners. So we'll typically bring in anywhere from 3 to 30 partners. Our first cable system that we built in 1995, we had 31 partners. They actually helped us to finance that cable. We built it with them as a consortium. Our second system, and most recent system, Hawk and Eagle, were also, we actually financed by selling cable assets before we actually built the cable. And it looks like, from our perspective, we'll actually have this cable completely funded before it actually goes into the water. So, similar to our prior 3 cables, we're very, very excited about this, and I think we'll be able to, you'll see a series of announcements over the next few months as we actually announce the new players coming into the system. What I thought I'd do today is talk to you a little bit about the market. We'll spend some time on GCX and what we call the new Rcom, so you get some idea of the company that we're operating here, and we'll actually be operating this market in the years ahead. We'll talk about the Eagle system, and then we'll talk about the timeline when we're going to deliver the system, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. This is just a history. Many of you don't know we were actually, many companies have come together to form GCX. GCX was actually formed in 2013, but it is an amalgamation of 3 major companies. It was originally Flag Telecom, which started in the late 90s and early 2000s. That system was the first private submarine cable ever built. It went on to become the largest private cable around the world that was ever built. And Flag was Fibre Link Around the Globe was the name of the initials, were what they stood for. And in 1995, this was the biggest internet cable ever built. We are actually going to take that cable system and we're actually replacing it with the next largest cable ever built. So what we'll talk about today, the 20 terabits per fiber, will make this fiber that's going to go into the water will be as large as all of the other cables in this region combined. Okay, so just to give you some idea of the capacity of this new cable system. Similar to 1995 when we pioneered the first system, this system will be very, very important to us. Over the course, and now one of the things that we also have in addition to that asset, We will continue to operate. We're one of the largest operators in the Atlantic Ocean. We're one of the largest operators in Europe. We will continue to operate in what we call the emerging market corridor. So this area right here is our dominant area, which is the Middle East, India, and Eastern Europe. We actually are the largest owner of infrastructure assets in that part of the world. And then obviously the Asia-Pacific region and across to Silicon Valley. We also we have terrestrial networks obviously in India, but also in the United States. We also have Western Europe, and we actually have backhaul networks in Asia. Right now today we actually boast the largest fiber footprint across India. Obviously there will be some changes with this going forward as we speak in the months ahead. But if you look at our infrastructure today, we are the largest operator today of fiber in the country. So what you'll see as you start to think about our new company, we are going to take this global fiber network, we're going to make it 10 times the size of the fiber that we have today, okay? We will build this with our partners and continue to grow with our partners. We'll focus mostly on the emerging markets. So if you look at the emerging markets, which is, we define it as everything from Japan all the way to Eastern Europe, this is the most important part of the world, we think, over the next decade. And the reason this is very, very important is because you've got roughly 55 to 60% of the world's population, but you almost have 75% of the world's youth. You actually have the most educated population in the world, and you have almost 1.6 billion people that will actually be going onto the internet for the very first time in that part of the world. And we believe this is the place where growth will come. And I go to a lot of conferences with Fortune 500 CEOs, this is the markets that they're actually focusing on. This is where growth will come in the next 10 years. And then finally, we will talk a lot about clouds. One of the things that we're seeing around the world is the shift. Telecom companies will not survive the next decade if they're just telecom companies. One of the things that you're seeing in India is there's a massive change in terms of how companies operate and actually what's happening in the telecom industry. And I believe this is just the beginning. We actually are in a very, very hyper-competitive environment here in India, but this will translate to other markets where you're going to see companies starting to become a different type of service operator. And the importance of actually integrating cloud computing, data centers, fiber into an ecosystem will be the key to survival. And companies that do that will survive. Companies that don't do that will struggle. And I think you'll start to see that we've got a large focus in that new product development area going forward. Let's talk about the market. And one of the things that, when we talk about where things are headed, and I think the thing that we didn't realize a long time ago was you are going to have a different environment with connected devices. When we started with the internet, it was mostly people on computers. Then it became phones. Now it's machines. And if you look at the machine growth grows exponentially. It's a geometric number now every year in terms of growth. And if you look at virtually everything that is on the internet, there's no longer a Moore's law. There's no longer a law that says it's going to be a linear focus. There's a change, and it's a geometric change. Whether it be photographs. One of the interesting things that you'll find is one of the stats that we saw the other day. In 1 year, okay, every person, if you look at each human being that owns a smartphone, they've taken more photos in the last year than they did in their lifetime, which is an amazing thing. They actually have shot more photographs. And you start to think about, where does all that data go? And then where does it get stored? How does it move? Where is it gone? That just gives you some idea of how we've changed as a society and how we've changed as people. Some of the other things that's interesting is our cars, our motorcycles, everything that actually moves on the planet now is connected to the internet. And the reality is that if you look at it, connected devices, we're very close to being to a point where every single device that's connected to us or that we use is somehow connected to the internet. One of the things also is you'll start to see the smartphones have changed here in India. For example, one of the big challenges I think that we've seen in India is the move from voice to data traffic. And one of the things about smartphones is it has a double impact. And this is very similar to what happened to the United States. If you think about the telecom industry in 1995, most people made telephone calls in America. By 2001, they were using it for data. And the shift that had on the industry was essentially you went from a low capex industry to an extremely high capex industry. And this is one of the things that you don't realize when you start to look at what's happened here in India over the last 3 to 5 years, is we've actually shifted our mobile industry from being a capital light industry to a capital heavy industry. And one of the things about data is it is extremely capital intensive. And as this starts to change, this is also going to change the model and how we operate even globally. We're also entering what I think is probably one of the most profound eras. And this is what Mary Meeker calls the third wave. One of the things that was interesting about the internet, it was largely used for people like yourselves, reporters, to actually send information back and forth. If you look at it, we actually use the internet largely for getting information. In the second wave, we started to use it for other things. We started to send things between people. But where we are now is a very, very interesting place. This is artificial intelligence. This is mass usage of data. This is actually taking that data and integrating it into the ecosystem. So it's things like Uber that have now come around where you've actually integrated those data, the fact that you've got machines on the internet that actually can be tracked, monitored, and then monetized. And I think one of the things that you're seeing in this new era is the internet has actually been changed from being a utility to actually being capable of being used for essentially new intelligent pervasive systems and also big data, which actually can analyze things. And it's interesting, I go now to CEO conferences, they never cared about IT. Now, the most important thing is big data and IT. They want to understand how artificial intelligence can change their lives. And it's interesting, and I talk about, one of the interesting things was, I was at a pharmaceutical, with a group of pharmaceutical CEOs a couple months ago, and they're talking about the human genome. And in the 1990s, it would take somewhere around a year and almost $4 million to actually map one human. Today, you can do it for $400 over the internet. You can have your genome mapped. And if you look at it, that's all just about cloud computing and data has changed. And that's completely changed the pharmaceutical industry. Because now they actually can build drugs and solutions to actual problems mapped to actual human genomes. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is once these things start to be applied into real sciences and the real opportunities, it will change how we live. And it will change everything that we do. Next slide. One of the other things that happens, and you've seen this in the internet age and some of the new startup companies, is the velocity of growth. Companies, and if you look at things like originally the radio or the television set, they took decades to get to 1 million subscribers. You can now get to 1 million subscribers in less than a week with your application, which is absolutely amazing. And part of it is the velocity at which you can market, the velocity at which you can actually get a customer into your application, and the ability that you can actually start to monetize. You can actually do those three things, which used to take months, years, decades, now happen in a matter of days, minutes, and hours. And it's interesting, you can actually, there have been, when you start looking at the internet, the number of companies that have gotten to 1 million customers in less than 2 weeks is astounding. There are 19 companies today that have gone from 0 to 1 million users in less than 2 weeks. Pretty amazing stuff, including Geo here was one of them. But if you start to think about the companies around the world that have been able to do that. And then we're just seeing the beginning of what this means. So from our perspective, next slide. We actually see a very, very important shift. And we see the importance of data, and we see the importance of massive highways of fiber running around the world. That is why we're building this system, and that's why we're actually going to spend our next 2 years actually getting this into the water and putting India at the center. Our belief is Silicon Valley has had its day. It's been a long time. We actually have here, we believe, some of the best engineers, probably the best ecosystem for actually building software, which is the key driver in the new cloud ecosystem. And we believe if we can connect it to major data centers and cloud computing centers around the world, we actually can make quite a business from this going forward. And we're pretty excited about it. So let's, I want you to hear about our cable system. Next slide. Oh, sorry. And some of the other key market drivers that I wanted you to understand is this part of the world. This is just some of the stats on where it's going to grow. This, when we talk about the emerging market corridor, you're actually going to see it growing at sort of 8 to 7%. If you start looking at some of these bigger countries, everyone's in the 6 to 7%. Most of the rest of the world will be actually growing at about 3% over the next period of time. So the reason why it's very, very important for us to be in the emerging market corridor is if you want to have a growth company, this is the place to be. One of the other things that's interesting, we won't talk about it today, but we will announce this down the road. We are investing quite a bit, not only in the infrastructure in data centers, but actual data centers themselves. if you look at today, where most of the cloud computing sits, it sits in two primary places: the United States of America and Western Europe. This is the emerging market corridor. This is where all the growth is going to happen over the next 2 decades. Reality is, there's absolutely no computing power there. There's actually no fiber here. So if you look at the infrastructure in the emerging market corridor today, there's really very limited access to these types of assets. And the reality is the growth is going to be extremely high. As we've seen with everything else, whether it be automobiles, whether it be TV sets, whether it be handsets, India has caught up to the rest of the world. If you look at the numbers in terms of penetration of assets in the population, in every major category, it is actually equalized. And you'll start to see that, we believe, in the emerging market corridor, you're going to have people, we're going to have to start to see large amounts of compute power coming into this part of the world. So a huge opportunity we see there as well. Excellent. The other thing that's interesting is the number of internet subscribers in this part of the world. If you look at today, the largest portion of new users actually sits, obviously, in Africa is your largest, Asia is your second largest, but then this corridor here. And if you look at these two areas, you put those two boxes together, those are the new users of the internet. So even if you look at what we call traditional internet services, we believe that this part of the world will be where it will be over the next decade. Okay.